fascism in the United States. So what's going on globally is we have an increasing surplus humanity, surplus labor force in the United States and globally. That is increasingly hundreds of millions, if not billions of people are pushed out of the global economy of any meaningful existence. They're simply surplus, redundant humanity. The United Nations data shows us that 1/3 of humanity is unemployed. That is 1/3 of humanity worldwide, the global working class. 1/3 is unemployed.
Wow.
And 52% work in what's called precarious labor, vulnerable labor. And that increasingly vulnerable labor, that means that you work part-time, you work under contract labor, you work without guaranteed employment, you work temp workers, you work without benefits, without insurance. It's not tenured fixed employment like people in the United States have historically, or at least for the last 100 years or so since Fordism, been accustomed to. So it's called the new precariat, meaning the proletarian under very precarious conditions. So increasingly in the United States, you have the downward mobility of the working class and these increasing precarious conditions. And you have surplus humanity. Well, how do you contain surplus humanity? The only possible way is through systems of mass repression. And so that's the first thing that drives us towards a fascism around the world, is the need for systems of mass repression to contain surplus humanity. But let's focus a minute on the United States. There's a very important and interesting phenomenon, and it's that historically in the United States, the working class has been racially divided. Really key division. And in the United States also, since the United States has been, for the last 100, 150 years, been a big imperialist power, you've had what Lenin famously called the labor aristocracy in the United States, meaning a portion of the U.S. working class has had high living standards because the United States is plundering the rest of the world, bringing that wealth back and redistributing it to a portion of the working class through higher wages and good-paying jobs, so forth. Okay, so as capital went global, it no longer needs much of a labor aristocracy in the United States. So that labor aristocracy experiences downward mobility and these precarious conditions, basically economic and social destabilization. Let's link that to the issue of racism, because the Trump regime, we know that Trump is a racist. We know that he used racist manipulations against Mexicans, more subtly against blacks, against Muslims, that racist mobilization, which is a key element of fascism. Well, what's going on here is that the sector of the U.S. working class that was the labor aristocracy with good working and living conditions was disproportionately white because of racism. And that sector is experiencing this downward mobility, this destabilization, the new poor white, which is increasingly tens of millions of working class white people that are suddenly, in this totally precarious conditions. And I mean, there's been scandals about the rise of drug abuse and alcohol abuse and suicides among this sector of the white working class. And that sector of the white working class, in part, significantly in part, voted for Trump. So the problem that U.S. rulers face is, how do you prevent that downwardly mobile sector of the white working class, which gave stability to the U.S., capitalism for so long, from rebelling, from identifying with blacks and poor immigrants and so forth, and questioning the whole system? And that's where a racist discourse, a racist mobilization, and a racist discourse emerges through some type of a neo-fascist project. And we have to acknowledge that historically part of fascism is you can't have fascism without a social base. If you don't have the social base, you're talking about outright dictatorship. But fascism and dictatorship cannot be identically the same thing. You have dictatorship, but fascism is when when you truly develop a mass base. So German Nazism did develop a mass base among German workers who had suffered for 20 years of unemployment and absolute misery. And fascism in Germany resolved a part of their needs temporarily. And then, we know the rest of the story. So Trump's discourse is neo-fascist discourse, trying to mobilize that downwardly mobile white sector of the working class, along with the other dimensions of fascism. The other dimension of fascism is the expansion of a police state, and we're seeing that. And we're not seeing a breakdown of constitutional order, because that's where I also analyze there's a difference between 20th century and 21st century fascism. We are seeing a breakdown of some constitutional rights. We know all of that. But the thing is that economic power is so unbelievably concentrated in the United States that it so far has been able to translate into political control over electoral outcomes. And we saw that, of course, with Bernie Sanders. So the other thing that fascism requires, if you're going to talk about fascism, are fascist movements in civil society. I mentioned previously a fascist project is when capital fuses with a very repressive reactionary state. And we are seeing that. The difference between 20th and 21st century is now it's transnational capital, not national capital. But the other key thing for any fascist project is when you see fascist movements in civil society. And that we've seen growing unbelievably, well, going back to the last 15, 17 years or so, but especially since Trump took office, especially since 2008 and then since Trump took office. So you see the dramatic, first you saw the Tea Party, and then you see the dramatic expansion of the white nationalist movements, of the anti-immigrant movements, the traditional fascist groups, of course, the Nazis and the Ku Klux Klan, the white militia, extremely dangerous white militia, the Christian fundamentalism, the right-wing Christian fundamentalism movement is truly, it's what I characterize as a fascist U.S.
Oh, it is, without a doubt. Without a doubt.
Without a doubt. And now,
but here's the question. When he's doing it already, his administration, but when he totally abandons his platform towards these white working class people that thought he was the new Messiah, what happens then?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that because I actually posed the question myself as well. That's the key thing. The Nazis, at least temporarily, and I'm not obviously defending the Nazis, the most horrible things that ever happened to humanity, but the Nazis were able, under those particular circumstances, to temporarily give employment and some stability to that immiserated working class. But Trump has no possibility of resolving that the plight of that downwardly mobile, destabilized white working class. So you are
right. So what happens? Right. What happens when they're abandoned? When they're betrayed?
Absolutely. So either what do? Does that sector then align with the others around them? The blacks and immigrants and so forth. And is there some leftist alternative? And then that leads to the question: where is the left to articulate an alternative project? Or do they start rebelling spontaneously and we see riots in the streets all over, and then we have the declaration of martial law, and then we could have a breakdown of constitutional order?
No, I think it's going to be the third thing. The third thing is going to be scapegoating. It's going to be, what really frightens me, Professor, is the third option is there's going to be that's when you're going to see the real rise of neo-fascism. You're going to see the extreme scapegoating of the other groups, blaming them, not blaming Trump or the elites.
Yes.
That's what frightens me.
Right. Yes, absolutely. I agree with you. That's why I'm saying those first two options, and then the third is exactly what you said, and that then is a full-blown neo-fascist system. So that's exactly my fear. It's not inevitable, but it's my fear. And I want to point out something that you've probably given thought to this as well. Look at the white militia in the Montana and the Dakotas area, and remember Bundy? I believe that was the name, Bundy or McBundy, when they actually had an armed uprising against the FBI, like this was 3 years ago, because they wanted grazing rights, and the FBI actually backed down. Now, of course, we know if they were blacks or immigrants or anything, there would have been a mess. Okay, but they backed down, and then they won in court. They were not charged in court. Now, very close by was the water protectors, the indigenous water protectors in the Dakotas, the Dakota Access Line. Now, and then we saw the incredible National Guard and police and this state military repression against the water protectors. Now, in the scenario you're talking about, the actual fascism that emerges, just like what you said, imagine if in the next mass uprising, whether they're indigenous, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whatever it is, and then the state comes in with this incredible repressive apparatus, but then the white militias come along and join forces with the state. Then you have a linkage of this military fascism in civil society with state repressive and military forces.
Well, yeah, I mean, anytime you have a black face, you're gonna have this backlash against it. Did you ever see? There's a movie called The Incident, Professor, 1968. It was about a train in New York, a subway was taken over by two white guys who were crazy, two hoods, two hoodlums, and they took over this one car of the train, and they were horrible. They were, antagonizing, and there was one couple, a black couple. The actor was Brock Peters, the wife was Ruby Davis. played the wife. And there's one black couple on the train, and they're frightened. They're just sitting there, and the rest of the people on the car are all white, and these two white hoods, punks, they're brutalizing. And finally, at the end of the movie, a vet, the guy who was out of the army, he had a bad arm. He stands up to them and he kills one of the bad guys or something. And the train pulls into the station, and the cops come running onto the train. And the first thing they do is they grab the black guy. They grab the black guy. They're going to arrest him. I mean, it was just amazing. The symbolism. Anyway.
Yeah. Unbelievable. Well, that also reminds me. Remember the Oklahoma City bombing was done by right-wing white groups.
Right.
However, if you go back and listen to the radio and television reports, for the first hour or so, they were saying Islamic terrorists.
Arabs. Yeah. So you and I both agree that, unfortunately, and we both hope that we're wrong. But if once Trump really shows his betrayal of all these white people, and most of them are low or middle income, whatever you want to call them, working class, when they get betrayed, we would hope that they would realize who's screwing them. But unfortunately, the scapegoating with the media is going to come. That's what happens. So. And
yes,
the Democratic
but on the
Party,
other hand,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, forget about the Democratic Party, but
right.
But on the other hand, I think it's important that we can't lose hope and we can't lose faith, and neither can we relinquish our responsibility to try and build a progressive left alternative. So when some of those disillusioned white people will be brought into a leftist alternative, whether it's a Bernie Sanders type movement or whether it's something else. So, we can't sit back and resign ourselves to the fascist, to a fascist future. And I don't think all hope is lost because, history, the future is never predetermined and it depends on what we do. There's also a mass fight back right now. And when you look at that mass fight back, you also see massive amounts of young white people there. It's the older generation that was used to their racial privilege and that's, more susceptible to this fascist manipulation. So, just to conclude, we can't lose hope and faith, and we can't stop struggling for a left program which brings in enough of those people to avoid and give us a different future than fascism.
Well, I think what you talked about earlier, when you mentioned about the ecological, I think that could be the ecological aspect could be a bringing together of different people. When people can see, because they can actually see where they live, they're getting screwed by the unhealthiness of the fracking, and all that crap.
Yeah.
So that might be a Rubicon that people can cross together. The ecological
Absolutely.
dangers of what this capitalist crazy corporatism is doing because it affects them where they live. So, there's always hope, right?
Yes. Absolutely.
Well, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for taking the time to. It's been about a wonderful hour, and I can't wait for people to listen to what you've been saying because you've covered so many. You've covered things on a much higher level of understanding that I, for one, haven't, been exposed to. So I think that's important. The way you bring it home. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on. And I think that's what we need. We need if we don't understand what we're up against, we can't fight it. So I think it's good to have a deeper level of analysis, and again to do that surface level analysis, the moment the day-to-day politics and geopolitics, but then also go beyond and have this what I call a systemic critique, a critique of the system itself and how it's functioning.
Well, thank you so much, Professor, and I look forward to having another interview with you. Maybe we can cover like a different subject after that. We can cover the Democratic Party for an hour.
Yeah, thank you.
We can cover the Democratic Party for an hour as to the total sellout of the Democratic Party.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Professor, and I'm looking forward to speaking to you again.
Same here. Take care.
Okay. Good night.